I give you permission to move on, Nicholas.
Thank you very much. Well, I am going to be talking about American Vampire 1976. And I got to imagine this has been optioned at some point and maybe just, there's no follow through on it or whatever. But the fact that we don't have an American Vampire show or movies is mind blowing because this was such a big time series. I mean, this is what Scott Snyder is known for. I guess people are going to say Batman first. This would be second. You could probably say vice versa. I don't know what he would necessarily say. I never asked him. I bet you he would give us an answer like, I can't pick just one because, right? Yeah. Okay. But of course, this was originally a Vertigo series and has since become a DC Black Label series. The American Vampire 1976 was strictly a Black Label series that ran, I believe it was 2019 into 2020. We just got the hardcover version of this a little bit ago. The reason I wanted to do it this week, or this month at least, was because we were supposed to be getting American Vampire, the trade paperback version this month. A great gift for someone to pick up, especially for someone who's read American Vampire but didn't necessarily get on this right away, like our friend Rich Keefe, who had asked me about this multiple times. And I want to clear a little bit of the air here because you had said you were surprised at how excited I was to talk about this. So this was the #1 book on the #dork TLDR horror comics list. This was at #1. Davey and Keefe had it very high. I think Keefe had Walking Dead as his #1. I had this as #10. Of course, Joe, you only read a couple of the books, right? Because you wanted to just be able to talk about it on the
Yeah, I didn't read enough of it to be able to properly rank it. Yeah,
of course. Still got #1. Still didn't matter. I put it 10, and what I said on that, and you guys can go watch that conversation on YouTube. We really had a great time, the four of us. But what I said at the time, and I still stand by, is American Vampire is a great story. Snyder built, in Rafael Albuquerque, built this amazing world, and all around, it is an awesome series. It was not, I was too far removed from it at the time because I went and reread a ton and I'd forgotten, I knew it was good. I just forgot how freaking good it was. I still wouldn't change where I ranked it because when we're talking about horror books, yes, this is violent. Yes, you're dealing with vampires, and these vampires are not what's that stupid movie with, oh my God, with the guy who's Batman now, Pattinson. What's the Batman, the vampire movie? Do you remember?
Oh,
the one that was the book in the hit series that came out.
Twilight.
Thank you. It's not like we're not dealing with twinkling vampires or shit like that. We're dealing with some gruesome ass motherfuckers. But this is not something that scares me. This is not something like Hotel or The Autumnal or Scott's book Witches, which, he's working on that show right now. Has not, by the way, said who that show is going to be with, whether it's Prime or Netflix or whatever. But those things are oh, fuck. You have a lot of shivering moments in the course of reading that. With this, American Vampire is great, and I absolutely love it and recommend it to anybody. It's more of a great story dealing with horror, characters from the occult or the horror-ish, whatever you want to call it, all vampires and everything, and then you kind of get others introduced. So Rich had asked me for a while, how is this one? How is the new one? I want to pick it up. And I fell behind on it just because I had been so far removed from the 8th volume of it, which was the latest one prior to 1976. And I read the first couple and I was like, okay, this is good. It feels like picking up where that one left off, but I'm just not in the headspace to read it right now. I went back, looked at a lot of the old stuff, especially the more recent American Vampire, talking volume 8, and then I think it was 6 and 7. One of them's an anthology in there, but really making sure I know everything that's going on with all of this shit because there's a lot at play in American Vampire 1976. You're dealing with a big bad that you'd heard about quite a while back that you thought had been beaten, that pops up in the course of things. You're dealing with another big bad that you had met in, that you'd learned about in American Vampire 8. And I would say if this is absolutely something that you have to read all the other American Vampires in order to really fully appreciate this, because you'll hear mention of certain characters and it's who are they talking about? And then you'll, Scott does a good job of catching you up, but it's more this is the 9th volume of a series. What do you expect? But that's kind of, I'm talking about American Vampire on the whole too, for people who haven't read the series. And I could not recommend this enough. As for the synopsis for American Vampire 1976, actually first, of course, written by Scott Snyder, artist Rafael Albuquerque. And then for American Vampire 1976, the colors were done by Dave McCaig. I don't know if he's the colors for all of American Vampire. I feel like he is. And then the letters were done by Steve Wands for the series. Now for the synopsis. Paranoia reigns supreme. It's 1976, and this is the final chapter of the Eisner Award-winning American Vampire, a seedy motorcycle rally in the desert where Skinner Sweet is closer than ever to his death wish. Pearl Jones and her shocking partner track him down for one last desperate mission as the series that launched the careers of superstars Scott Snyder and Rafael Albuquerque concludes. So this, of course, it collects American Vampires American Vampire 1976 issues 1 through 10 in the hardcover, and the trade will be the same thing. So yeah, the shocking partner, you find out who that was how it is in the first issue. And as much as you and I have talked about, like, things that pop up in the first issue of a series, it's not really a spoiler when that happens, but it is kind of a surprise that if you haven't seen it already, I don't want to take it away from you, but I will say it's a character who you haven't seen in a while if you're an American Vampire fan. We'll leave it at that. There is a tease that we learned about. I want to say it was an American Vampire 5, that maybe it was 6, that was never made good on, that Scott and Raphael address in this, and they give you the whole lowdown on everything of what happened there. But what's really cool is, like, Scott, one of the reasons that Scott's so good isn't just like his world building, but the pacing of any story that he tells. He knows how to, he will go and use, some characters here, some characters there, because there's always at least 2 angles to a story, right? Even when we're talking about good guys, like Saga, that's part of why Saga's so good, because everybody's all split up and all these characters converging onto one thing, but they're kept separate to certain pivotal moments. But Scott does that in this series, but he also does quite a bit of having these important characters together at once too. And he still manages to pace things very well. I feel like that can be a little bit challenging. We're talking about maintaining the focus of readers. Me being guilty as anybody, where you can kind of just space out. That's why comics are the preferred medium for me versus it's the truth. When I'm reading prose, I am reading some prose stuff, but I definitely am prone to space out, if I'm tired, especially, or whatever. What, you got something to say?
I was gonna say, you let your mind, your imagination build that world, build that imagery for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in the past,
you got to be spoon-fed. Apparently,
yes. But I've definitely gotten better at that in the past few years. But in the past, it was definitely a challenge for me. And I think that's just because of the way my brain works, where I just can bounce around 15 different ways. Anyways, moving on. So yeah, so you're getting a lot of characters who, it's been a few years. So some of these characters have aged. Of course, some of these are vampires, so they haven't aged. And then there's a lot of different groups and whatnot that we've heard from over the years, or heard about over the years. We haven't necessarily met them. We learn more about the history of vampirism in the U.S. and how important it was to this country, in this world, and how Washington and everything like that, his relationship with vampires and whatnot. It's a little bit different than what happens in Philadelphia, quite a bit different actually, but still they are, you learn a little bit more about that in Snyder and Rafael Albuquerque's world. But I think with this series too, Scott is, what's interesting is it's Scott had made it sound like, when we talked to him on the show, Joe, we had him on one time and he definitely talked about American Vampire a little bit, and we did not ask him about it. It might have been the first time we had him on, if not the second time. Am I making that up, or does that sound right?
No, we definitely talked about it briefly.
Okay,
for sure, but the details of it I can't remember.
Well, the one thing I thought that I was going to ask you about was, I thought he said that this is a good, it's not necessarily the end for American Vampire. It's
right. Yeah, I do recall that. Yeah,
okay,
he did say that.
Thank you. He could absolutely leave it and never come back to it. The way he ends this, absolutely, it could be done. That's it. Finite, and you'd be fine. You did a great job, but I'd also be fine with him picking it back up, especially with some of the stuff that happened in the past. But there are certain things that happen to important characters where it's if you left it the way it is, you'd be fine. And I think Scott's busy enough where he maybe doesn't necessarily need to have to go back to this either. But it's a fitting end, I think, and there's a lot of surprises along the way. There's a big surprise in the first issue, but there's something I thought nothing was going to top that as I'm reading this. But then there's another thing that happens later on in American Vampire 1976, where I'm just No fucking way. Did that seriously just happen? Like the script is flipped in one way, and then it's just also like you just never would have seen this coming, and it's just like perfect. Like, but what's so good like about this series is you don't the twists are great, but like Scott doesn't need to go and rely on those so heavily. Like, you can get a twist right, and then you can be like okay for like a couple pages. Like you can get through those and you'll be fine. It's not like that. Like everything is quality, everything matters, and it's all these little things that just add up along the way. So, I mean, I know you haven't read it. I know at some point you will because we've had him on the show enough times that you got to read. It's like
How many? How long is it? How many volumes?
It is. This is the ninth. This is the ninth volume. So maybe if we take a vacation,
9 volumes of so 8,
yes.
and then this one. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So, but it's all. Even this one
I can
is
bang that out in a weekend.
all available on Hoopla. There is only one I would say you could probably get away without reading, where I think it's strictly anthologies, but even then, I think they're still dealing with like some of the other characters who you care about. So and it's all good. Like I wouldn't skip over any of it. But yeah, it's funny like looking back on it now, like where things start in the first one, and just like the twists and stuff, but like just how far things have come. Where like you're dealing with like the Wild West, and now these characters are in 1976, and just a whole different world. But at the same time, it's also the same world that they've been dealing with this whole.
Yeah, because I remember he talked. Now it's coming back to me a little bit. He talked about how he loves this time period, and he thought vampires in '76 would tell a great story.
Yeah.
So
he did a really good job, actually. When you talk about that, like that's a great point. How important that was to him. He definitely leans into that in a good way throughout the series, and just how like the division with vampirism in the country, and then the birth of this country and everything. I actually I didn't even think about it like that, but he did do a really good job. Now that you bring it up, but when we talk about show or movie, because we always do that with every book that you and I talk about on this show. I want to say show. I think it would do really well as a movie too, but I just think there's so much where you could go and make this like 6 seasons, 10 episodes a pop, put it on HBO, put it on Netflix. I don't care, whatever.
Yeah,
and
I mean 9 volumes. That's more than enough to do. You could do a season or 2 seasons of volume. You know what I mean? Like
you could, yeah.
That's how I mean, by and large, unless it's like I think a very short contained story, TV shows are the way to do it. I mean, look what they've done with The Boys and Invincible and all those other ones that we love. Whereas like the movies, like they very rarely adapt, I should say, a single like comic story into a movie. They'll take elements from it, right? Like Infinity War. It's not like they just took the graphic novel and did a straight adaptation of it. They always just kind of take bits and pieces of it and do it. Whereas with TV shows, you can, I think, for the most part, like take the source material, stretch it out. You do X amount of 1 hour episode, 45-minute episodes per season, and have it be really satisfying.
Yeah, absolutely. As for the characters, again, there's an important character that pops up who's been away for a bit that you thought was, maybe you weren't going to see from or hear from again necessarily. But we do quite a bit in this series. I don't want to reveal who that is, but we do see that, like you've seen over the years in American Vampire, is you have Cal, you have Skinner Sweet, you have Pearl Jones, the main players, Travis Scott, and Felicia Book. I think I'll just leave it at those characters are pretty much the main players. And then if you read American Vampire, the 8th volume of American Vampire, the villains and everything, and that's a whole nother thing. Again, I don't want to spoil stuff because there's just so much more for you to read. But like the origin of that character and that character, the more so the number 2 to the big bad is very, very interesting. But there's a lot there, but that we're picking up off on all that stuff too. So if you've been waiting on it, if you were like our buddy Rich Keefe over on #Dork, don't wait any further. The hardcover is already out. It's on Hoopla. You should be able to buy the trade this month. But the only reason I'm hesitant, I know that's always been the plan, but the only reason I'm hesitant is just because of the printing stuff. Obviously, we saw what happened with the Scorched, which we're dying to get that. But yeah, great series, must read if you read American Vampire previously, 100%.